The highway stretched endlessly under the cover of night, a long, dark expanse interrupted only by the occasional flicker of dim streetlights. A sleek black vehicle glided down the road, moving steadily in the right lane. Its engine hummed quietly, blending with the silence of the surrounding darkness. Inside, Claire Dawson sat straight, her eyes locked on the road ahead. She was lost in thought, replaying the confidential briefing she had just concluded. As the newly appointed director of a major federal agency, the long hours and sleepless nights had become a way of life. But nothing in her career had prepared her for what was about to transpire. Her speedometer was perfectly aligned at 65 miles per hour, no sudden swerving or reckless driving. So when the flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror, Claire's brows furrowed in confusion. She checked the dashboard again. 65 miles per hour. No change. Exhaling slowly, Claire signaled and steered her car onto the shoulder of the road. She'd been in law enforcement her entire life. She knew the drill. This was routine. But something about this felt off. The patrol car behind her sat unusually still, and the sinking feeling in her stomach suggested it wasn't just a typical stop. The officer emerged from the cruiser, moving with a deliberate, almost predatory slowness. He was unfamiliar to her, though she didn't know every officer in the area. Still, there was something unsettling about his demeanor, his stance rigid, his hand hovering too close to his sidearm. The flashlight in his other hand swung unervingly as he approached. Claire rolled down her window, keeping her hands in plain sight on the wheel. "Evening, officer," she greeted him, her voice calm and composed. The officer didn't respond. Instead, the beam of his flashlight lingered a moment too long on her face before he finally spoke in a gruff tone. "License and registration." Claire tilted her head slightly, maintaining her calm. "Could you tell me why I've been pulled over?" "License and registration," he repeated, his voice unwavering. She nodded slowly, reaching across the passenger seat for her purse. She pulled out her wallet and handed over both her driver's license and her federal credentials. The officer barely glanced at them, his eyes fixed on her. "Federal agent, huh?" he muttered. "Step out of the vehicle." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. She remained composed, but her mind was racing. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. It felt targeted, dangerous. The officer moved toward her door, his hand reaching for the handle. Without thinking, Claire's left hand shot out to grab the interior door handle. "Step back, sir," she said firmly. "You're outside protocol." His voice dropped low, but was laced with aggression. "Step out. Now." Claire had dealt with men like him before. Men intoxicated by power, unwilling to listen to reason. "On what grounds?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He hesitated for a moment, his posture stiffening. "Suspicious behavior," he finally muttered, but gave no further explanation. "What behavior?" Claire demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer, his flashlight blinding her. "I don't have to explain myself to you," he sneered. "Actually, you do," she responded, her voice firm. "I don't care who you work for," he retorted, his face twisted in frustration. Claire stood her ground. "Let's call your superior, then. I'm sure he'll explain it to you." The officer slammed his palm against the roof of her car in frustration. "Get out." Claire quickly glanced at his name tag. Miller. She made a mental note of it. Her phone was sitting on the center console, but Claire didn't dare reach for it. Any sudden movement could be used against her. "You're making a mistake," she said evenly. The officer let out a cold laugh. "The mistake was thinking you could pull rank on me." His hand hovered near his holster, and Claire felt a wave of danger wash over her. Then, the sound of another vehicle approaching caught her attention. Relief flooded her for a brief moment. Another witness, a chance for accountability. But when the second officer stepped out, a tall figure with no name tag and no eye contact, Claire realized this wasn't backup. This was reinforcement. "Problem here?" the second officer asked. "Just dealing with a non-compliant driver," Miller replied, his tone still laced with frustration. The second officer looked at Claire. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." "Not Director Dawson." "Just ma'am," the officer added with a dismissive tone. Claire knew she had two choices: comply and lose control, or resist and escalate the situation. Slowly, she opened the door. The cold night air bit at her skin as she stepped out of the car. Miller moved to block the dash cam, while the second officer flanked her, keeping her from escaping. "Turn around," Miller ordered. Claire's mind was racing. Why am I being detained? Suspicious behavior. Refusal to comply, Miller answered, his words dripping with contempt. It was a trap. She knew it. If she complied, they'd twist her actions. If she resisted, they would punish her. Miller grabbed her wrist too fast, too forcefully. "Get your hands off me," she snapped. "I think she's resisting," Miller said coldly, twisting her words to fit his narrative. "We have a non-compliance suspect." The second officer spoke into his radio, calling her a suspect, not a citizen, not an FBI director. Then, Miller drew his weapon, holding it inches from her face. "Do you feel powerful now?" he sneered. Claire's anger bubbled up, not for herself, but for the countless others she had read about in reports like this. Just as she was about to respond, a voice interrupted. "Hey, I'm recording this." A man stood nearby, phone raised, the light from his screen glowing. "You sure you want to do this, officer?" he asked. The power dynamic shifted instantly. Miller hesitated, glancing at his partner, his desperation evident. Claire seized the opportunity. "Put the weapon down," she commanded. In the distance, the sound of sirens grew louder, reinforcements arriving. Miller turned, his desperation mounting. He motioned for the second officer to silence the witness, but Claire had already taken control. "Touch him, and I'll personally charge you with obstruction of justice," she warned. The second officer hesitated, but the flashing lights were drawing nearer, and more patrol cars arrived. Officers poured out, cautious, until one of them recognized Claire. "Director Dawson," he said, his voice filled with recognition. Claire didn't miss a beat. "Detain these officers." Miller opened his mouth to protest. "This is a misunderstanding." Claire met his gaze coldly. "Then let's clear it up at headquarters." "You've got to be kidding me," Miller muttered under his breath as the cuffs were snapped around his wrists. His partner didn't protest. He looked like a man whose entire world had just shattered. "Get them out of my sight," Claire ordered, her tone final. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This wasn't just about two rogue officers. This was about the system itself. And Claire Dawson was ready to dismantle it. By the time the news cycle hit the next morning, the video was everywhere. By noon, the Department of Justice had launched an official investigation. Miller was stripped of his badge and charged with assault. His partner was suspended, and the department issued a bland statement, but the world had already seen the truth. From her office, Claire watched the coverage, her face unreadable. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered with a calm, professional tone. "Director Dawson." There was a pause, and then a familiar voice came through the line. "Just wanted to say thanks." Most people wouldn't have stood their ground. Claire exhaled slowly. "Most people don't have the power to. But I do. And this time, I plan to use it." Claire Dawson sat back in her chair, watching the unfolding coverage with a steady gaze. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. The battle she had fought on the roadside was more than a confrontation with two rogue officers. It was a microcosm of a deeper, systemic issue, one that reached beyond any single moment or individual. This was about the abuse of power, the manipulation of authority, and the struggle for accountability. But as she watched the news reports flood in, Claire felt a quiet sense of resolve. She had taken a stand not just for herself, but for the countless voices that had been silenced before. The phone buzzed again, but this time, she didn't rush to answer. Claire knew this fight was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. The incident had sparked a ripple effect, and soon, more would follow. Whistleblowers, investigations, pressure for reform. The system was broken, and she was ready to tear it down piece by piece. For Claire Dawson, the path ahead was clear. She wasn't just a director. She was a force for change. And with every move she made, she would ensure that power would never again go unchecked. This was just the beginning.